everyone, and welcome to my presentation. My name is Ruben. So today I want to talk to you about going beyond the numbers, finding those answers to those hard questions in your data and team. Now, every team has data, every company has data, and there's always lots of possibilities about what to do with it. So I want to give you a few ideas over the next short little while we're here together. And the goal really is for your team to not just look at your data as something that has to be done, but to look at it as a source, as some of the best answers for some of your toughest problems. For those who don't know me, my name is Ruben Ugarte. I am the principal and data strategist at Practical Analytics, and I'm an expert in data and decision making. And I work with companies, primarily medium to large enterprises, including the Fortune 1000. And I help them figure out how to get more insights out of their data and their teams. So we look at what data they're currently using, what else they could be tracking, how they're using that data. Is the team data proficient? And of course, we look at what kind of decisions are being made at the top and how that can be improved. So I have a few points here that I want to cover. We'll talk about data maturity, data proficient leadership teams, taking insights and converting those into action, and then speed bumps. I'm going to cover a few things, and then we'll finish up here. So first, whenever I look at a company, one of the first things I really want to look at is understand their data maturity. And in your companies, you can do the same thing. Now, there's tons of models around this, 5 levels, 6 levels, 12 levels, I don't know. I actually like to use this 3-level assessment that I created, where we look at the past, the present, and the future. In the past, we want to understand what happened, really the realm of data analysis. In the present, we want to understand what is going on. This can be data reporting. And in the future, we want to understand what will happen. And this is data science. So based on this, you can start to determine where your company fits. Do you do really well in the past? Do you really understand the present? Are you ready for the future? So jumping ahead, especially on the future side, prematurely can be quite frustrated. So when you look at your company, you want to understand the problem that you're dealing with. Is a problem that requires past data? Is it a problem that is really rooted in the present? It's a campaign that's going on, a product launch, and you want to know what's going on, or a problem that's been going on for multiple months, let's say poor retention. You need to look towards the past. And of course, at some point, you look towards the future to figure out what might be coming down. I then want to look at the team itself. So a lot of these questions are very suited for an executive team. You could really bring them down to director level, management level, and perhaps even the individual team level. What we want to understand is the overall level of data proficiency and start to look for those opportunities. So, for example, how long does it take to get an answer from the data? Right. This may be weeks, months, days, hours, minutes. And the real answer here is that most of the things that you'll need from your data should likely take something in the form of minutes, maybe hours, which means you need to have the kind of infrastructure that can allow you to do that, whether it's self-service data, reports that are built out, or just a quick way of building things up. And if you don't have this, then you're really spending too much time simply waiting. It's common to look at a company that has one data analyst, and the data analyst is completely backlogged, for the next 5 years. And at that point, you really start to lose opportunities just because you can't even get access to basic answers. So think about the time it takes to get an answer as the first step to determine where you can look for those opportunities. Next, we want to look at specific opportunities within the data and other sources. So we may be able to look at campaigns that perform quite well but don't have enough budget, maybe product features that people are using but we don't know about. Tons of famous stories around this, right? Instagram perhaps being one of them, about people using the photo sharing within their app. Before it was just 100% photo sharing. You may find the segments. You may find the power users, the people who really love your product, hidden in the data. So where are those and how can you find them? Next, what resources, whether internal or external, could help speed up initiatives. Here again, we're talking from a strategic perspective, but what's out there? What kind of resources, whether technical, software, technology, could really help you get more, whether it's faster answers, better data collection. Think about where the team in general is spending too much time. So it might be looking up the data, it might be waiting for the data, maybe it's analyzing, right? Looking through it and saying, making sense of it, understanding it, debating it, turning it into actions. Where are you getting stuck in sort of the general process, right? You may have great data, great reports, but there's a bit of a lack of clarity as to how to take it and convert it. Number 5, how many actionable insights is your team generating regularly? Keep in mind that this is really one of the end goals here. It doesn't really matter how much data you have or how amazing it is or how well set up it is if you're not really generating insights. If you're not learning something where you're saying, you know what, I didn't know that. I didn't know that mobile users converted at a higher rate than desktop users, or I didn't know that iOS performs much better than Android. Why is that the case? And start to diagnose. You're trying to understand those insights that will be relevant for your team. And then lastly, rate your team on a scale of 1 to 5 on the past, present, and future. Where do you do well? I find most teams do well on some of the areas. Where can you improve and why? Why does this matter? How is this tied to the overall strategic perspective? So let's look about how to convert insights into actions. And I want to give you a few ideas here, right? So we have some data. Again, every team has data, has reports. How do we take the insights you might be coming across into something that's tangible? So let's start by getting data into people's hands. 3 ideas here for you to consider. We have digital. I think data should be everywhere. You want people to metaphorically trip on it. And that can be in form of dashboards, Slack messages, email digests, offline capabilities, right? CSVs, Excel. So make it easy for people to consume the data. Everyone has different preferences, right? There's people out there who are amazing at Excel and they just want the raw data. And other people just want the dashboard. Other people just want to see something in their email inbox, which they see all the time. So make it easy. Second, think about establishing a meeting. I had a client that they had fantastic data, but it really wasn't getting into the hands of people. So we created this data meeting that would take place every 2 weeks. And it was optional. People could hop in as needed. And it was great. People brought their questions. We answered them. It was very effective. And we could discuss the data. And those 30, 60 minutes just on data was really helpful as a way to get going. Eventually, you might find this data meeting merges into everything else or gets absorbed into everything else. But at the beginning, it can be really powerful. And number 3 is people. Right? We talk about having the right people in place, whether it's someone who functions as a data analyst or even just someone who really understands the data, right? Someone who can answer basic questions as to what do we have? What does this mean? What is this event exactly? What is the criteria? What are the FYIs that we should know? All that kind of stuff. Think about expectations, right? So, the expectations, whether said or unsaid, can shape a lot of things. You can think about what happens when a new idea is presented, or you have a debrief, a postmortem, a review, a presentation. What's the expectation around the usage of data to back up some of those ideas? Is it expected? Is it nice to have? Is it a complete surprise when someone brings a chart, to back up an idea? You want to start looking at those expectations at the team-wide, company-wide, and trying to change them. I had a client in New Zealand who they didn't do much with data historically. They were an older company, about 20 years. And one person simply started shifting those expectations. She started bringing data to meetings, to conversations. And over time, everyone started to come around and say, what, this is helpful. We're going to do this. And then you start thinking about the other things, about how to get data into people's hands, how to provide support, and so on. But the expectations can just shift with one person, right? You look at, the baseball in the 1940s, and you imagine the guts of the Dodgers, LA now, but back then they were in Brooklyn, be able to hire Jackie Robinson, right? It sort of takes guts to hire the first Black baseball player, but they did it. And then every year after that, more players came to the league. And of course, you completely change that sport within a very contentious time. So sometimes it just takes one person to be able to change those expectations and go first. So let me give you a few speed bumps here, right? So now now that you understand the maturity, you understand where to go, where to focus resources. You're trying to figure out where are those gaps or opportunities in the data or how data gets consumed, and you have a few ideas for how to convert insights into actions. I also want to cover some of the speed bumps that you might see along the way. So these are some of the things that tend to get in the way of data. I call them the data trifecta, and they're really three. The overwhelm, silos, and something I call funky data. And these speed bumps can really derail efforts, right? You're doing your best, but they get in the way. So let's start with overwhelm, right? And data overwhelm is sort of the classic walking down the cereal aisle idea, right? Imagine you're trying to select a cereal and there's 100 options and they all look very similar, right? So unless you have a preference, unless you have something that you enjoy, how do you make a choice between these very similar cereals? And the same thing applies to anything, even something that as perhaps simple as almond milk can have now 10 different options. So data overwhelm happens in the same way, where teams are quite good at collecting data. And in fact, collecting data is getting easier day by day, year by year. They get to the point where they have too much data and now they're overwhelmed, right? They have no idea how to sort the noise and find really the core things that matter. And this can happen at the very top levels, at the leadership levels, and it can drill down and go down to the bottom levels. So let me give you 4 ways to tackle overwhelm, and you'll see some of them overlap with the other 2 speed bumps. So one is gatekeepers. This is counterintuitive, but some companies, the barrier to get a report is too low. So effectively, anyone who wants a report, whether it's done by a data analyst or someone else, they can just request it. Now, if you have self-service data, this is fine. You let people do whatever they want, to explore the data on their own. But if you have a process that requires people, like a data analyst, you want to think about gatekeepers and having someone who can simply just ask questions about why this report is needed, not in a confrontational manner, not in a let me see if I can catch you, but just in a matter of, do you really need this? That can actually start to really decrease the request, because a lot of requests might just be quite random, right? Simply a matter of, I had this idea, I wonder what it looks like, let me put a request, with no sense of how complex that request might be. So having a gatekeeper, someone who can sort through it, who can try to understand the business impact of the request and say, what, how does this really tie into strategy? How do we prioritize it? That kind of thing. Number 2 is WDIM. And WDIM stands for what does it mean, right? At the end of the day, when you look at any number, any KPI, you really want to figure out, what does this mean, right? If revenue goes down, what does this mean? Do we need to change behavior? Do we need to try something? If Android performs better than iOS, the flip side of the previous example, what does this really mean for us? Right? Do we need to do something with this data? And really, in meetings, conversations, you really want to be debating the WDIM. This is really what then starts to shape what you build, how you build it. Should you really tackle this area? Is this really worth the effort? And even a little bit of time on this question can be quite effective. Instead of just sort of jumping through it and being like, oh yeah, Android performs worse. Let's definitely, here's 3 things that we'll start building right away. And they can be in a pipeline next week. Next, if there is really too many things going on, you can also simply narrow it down to 3 things. 3 is a great number. It's a number that we tend to remember quite easily, right? 3 things, 3 ideas, 3 things. Numbers start with 3 digits. So at the end of the day, if you have 10 things, 10 insights, or 10 ideas in your data, pick 3, right? Pick the 3 that seem the most likely, and then move on and start working on them. This is a bit of the different example from thinking through the WDIM, but sometimes you just need to move, right? And I see teams that they have 10 great ideas, but they seem to be stuck and they're not quite sure how to move forward on any of them. So they're paralyzed, right? You're in front of the cereal aisle. You seem to have 3 choices that could be really good, but you're sort of paralyzed. You might as well just pick one and move on. The worst that can happen is you won't like the cereal. And the company, the worst that can happen you lose a couple of days to figure out this idea or validate it. And 4, think about the small data aspect of your data. So we hear a lot about big data and the future and how helpful it is. At the decision level, I think we really want to deal with small data. So we really want to find just the right amount of data to make this decision. So that may be one report or a few ideas, but the moment you have that, you really want to move on and make the decision. And this is a more qualitative than a quantitative measure, but as a team, as a leader, you want to gauge and understand what that looks like for you. When do you know enough, right? And you might have instances where you move too quickly before you have the required data, but it's fine. You adjust in the future. So the second speed bump to think about is silos, and silos can sort of look like grain silos where things are physically separated. What you may have here is silos of data that could be working together and would be much more useful together, but for some reason they're not. And the silos can then limit data because marketing team might have something that the sales team might want. I'll give you an example. I had a client that was trying to deal with sales issues. I was brought in to look at the sales process and how decisions were being made in the sales process. And what I quickly discovered is that it really wasn't a sales issue. It was a marketing issue. The quality of the leads that were coming into sales wasn't very high. So it didn't really matter how amazing the sales team was. In fact, they were quite good, that they were able to turn poor leads into customers. And they were, sort of doing amazing things in conversations to figure out what this lead really needed. So it really wasn't about fixing the sales process. It was about becoming better at the marketing process. So that disconnect between those two teams for years prevented them from actually doing it. But just simply adding a basic connection, a conversation between them can start to change that conversation. So 3 strategies again for silos. In my opinion, silos are primarily a people challenge. They're political in nature or tricky in nature. So it's not so much a technical issue. That is, you can connect data quite easily from a technical perspective, but the people element is tricky. So first, think about establishing a data marriage counselor. And I played this role for companies in the past where, because my background is technical as an engineer, I could have a conversation with the engineering team and the marketing team and be able to bring them into some kind of compromise, like a good counselor might. So this is a person who can go in between teams, might not represent any given team, but they're able to understand the needs and concerns of all the teams. What are the concerns from the technical team and what they might need to deal with? What about the marketing team? What about the sales team? What about the product team? And how do you find those compromises? So establishing this role, again, as a solution from a person perspective can be helpful. Number 2, it wasn't the self-interest, right? We look at the sales team and the marketing team example. It was clear that going to the marketing team and saying, the quality of your leads isn't very high, was a bit of a tough thing to say. The marketing team was being measured on how many leads they could drive. So anything that would affect that was going to be a no-starter. So we had to shift how the marketing team was being measured to say it's not about number of leads, but qualified leads. And it's okay if qualified leads are less, but let's change the dynamic here. So we started to work through it, and it takes time. So finding the self-interest in each given team is helpful. So for example, for the product team, a self-interest might be to have more time to think about what to build instead of always being so reactive and responding to things. So try to find a self-interest in every team and how that might be tied to breaking the silo, why this really matters to them, why they should even care about this. And 3 is about changing incentives. The example of the marketing team is along those lines. How are teams getting measured? What does it mean? Is it if a team gets measured for simply driving leads as a marketing team, your retention might suffer, right? You might get lots of new customers and signups, but your retention is low. So think about how those incentives are aligned, how they actually conflict with each other, and how you can align them among teams where you might have, let's say, a growth incentive for all the teams, marketing and product sales, and it's defined slightly differently for each team, but they all, win together or lose together. And lastly, funky data here, just in the final few minutes. So funky data is a term I coined to describe a lack of trust in data. If you ever looked at a number in your data and you thought, that number doesn't look quite right. There's something unusual about it. I'm not quite sure what it is, but there's something funky about it. That's effectively funky data. So funky data tends to happen in three ways. They might have technical issues. The data wasn't collected properly. Maybe expectation issues. You were expecting a 10% conversion rate and you got 7%. And then maybe there's a formula issue. That is you're expecting to see the conversion rate for desktop and mobile, but the data only tracks on desktop because mobile data hasn't been tracked yet. It's not a technical issue. It's not a bug. It just hasn't been done yet. Nonetheless, when you look at solving this funky data, you want to look at three things. First, ask for the work. So ask for the formula behind the calculation. Why use that event versus this event? Why this numbers versus those? Get a sense of the work. You're going back to school here, just like a math teacher doesn't just want the answer. They actually want to see you're thinking to get that answer. You really want that. That will give you some sense of what the assumptions were along the way to get the answer or the KPI you're seeing in front of you. Two, technical resources, right? You might have bugs, literal bugs in the data collection, where there's an ad blocker. Right now we see privacy, right, becoming a big issue on mobile specifically. So you might have technical bugs that you can solve by changing how you collect data. And number three is data proficiency. Do people know the basics around working with data, statistics, sample sizes, how to build charts, how to read charts, how to look for the gotchas in data and make sure you're not lying to yourself. So funky data is tricky. I had a client that they had fantastic data, but they didn't trust it. So I was brought in to fix the broken data. And what I realized is the data was not broken, but the people themselves didn't trust the data for some reason. There were maybe cases in the past where the data wasn't accurate, but it was accurate today. And we simply needed to run through some training and work with each person to understand what made them not trust the data. And over a few weeks, you can do that, right? You can bring trust back in the data. And I think, as I said before, you really build trust in the data one report at a time, and you lose it one report at a time. Training, as I mentioned before, is a fantastic solution for dealing with funky data. Just training people on how to work with the numbers, what the numbers mean. And there's a few different ways of running training here, whether it's group, ad hoc, which would be sort of one-on-one, a reactive, or documentation. Okay, so almost here in time. So let me give you the key takeaways for you to think about. Think about designing your ideal future with data, right? We have the past, the present, the future. What does that look like, right? Where do you want to go? What happened in the past? What's going on in the present? And where do you want to be in the future? Number two, you can level up how you think about your past and your present data by becoming much better at converting insights into action. So be it from a data meeting or making data available everywhere or changing expectations, you can start to level up how you think about the data. And lastly, think about taking those insights into action by tackling those speed bumps I mentioned before. So the overwhelm, the funky data, the silos, those are all the things that can get in the way of converting insights into action. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.